May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good morning. I'm Swami Atmavidyananda from the Hollywood Center. I haven't had an opportunity to speak to you for a long time, so it's nice to be here. And it's a beautiful winter day, but in California, winter days can be beautiful. So you might wonder what this topic is about. I mean, it says Vivekananda, Brahmananda, and Saraswati. Well, I'm going to try to relate those three and show you how Swami Vivekananda and Swami Brahmananda manifested the energy of the goddess Saraswati. Her puja is coming up on Wednesday. It's a triple header, Ash Wednesday, Valentine's Day, and Saraswati Puja. It's an interesting triplet. And of course, Swami Brahmananda's birthday is today, and Swami Vivekananda's birthday was just about 9 days ago. So they all come about this time. And so I'm going to open, that's why the mic was down there. I told Ananta I was going to open with a song, but it's this song written to the goddess Saraswati in the style of a school anthem, because she's the goddess of learning. So it would seem like if you had a school, they should have an anthem to Saraswati. Oops. No. Works better when it's on.
Hail to the goddess of learning, art, and song. We pray you grant us good hearts and voices strong. By your grace will flow our creating heart, and through your will divine perfection within us is manifested. Hail to the goddess, oh hail to thee. Oh, dressed in white, how radiant is your face, embodiment of purity and grace. We strive for learning to have all inspired me, and by your grace descending sweetly, we will reach our goals completely. Hail to the goddess, oh hail to thee. Your Satva Guna, the power that reveals, that part of Maya that does not much conceal. Consort of Brahma, you're the maker of hearts. Oh, knowledge, learning, music, beauty, your grandmother, Saraswati. Hail to the goddess, oh hail to thee.
That should do it. Tell me if it's okay. All right, so in those lyrics, you have a lot of the information about the goddess Saraswati, that she's the goddess of learning, art, song, music, poetry, learning, all sorts of things like that, and that she represents the Satva Guna, the revealing guna, and that's why she's dressed in white, and she's the consort of Brahma. So let's look at the origin of Goddess Saraswati and see exactly how she came about. Well, first of all, a little background of the way I see the various deities is that they are powers of nature. They are energies. They are the energy manifestations of Brahman in various ways. And of course, in the early history of the human race, we would try to figure out what was controlling the universe, what was controlling the wind and the rain and the thunder and the water and the climate and all sorts of things like that. And so these powers were deified. And of course, from the standpoint that everything is consciousness, we can see that indeed we can personify these energies. If everything is full of consciousness, why not personify that consciousness as a deity? And since Brahman can manifest in any way it likes, it can manifest as those deities. And my opinion is that it actually does manifest that way when people worship in that form. So people would offer sacrifices and offerings of thanks to the various unseen powers. Swami Vivekananda says that throughout history, humans have tried to grasp the abstract through the forms or symbols. And these deities, of course, are just that. They're symbols that we can use to grasp the infinite. So Saraswati is mentioned many times in the Rig Veda, probably over 50 times, many times as a river goddess, and then later as the goddess of wisdom. So we might ask ourselves, how do you get from a river goddess to a goddess of wisdom? Well, first of all, we have to realize that there really was a river Saraswati a long time ago, but it has dried up. So that's probably one reason that the goddess Saraswati has morphed into the goddess of learning, art, song, culture, and so forth. Because as a river goddess, she's not there anymore. She's underground. So there are many theories about exactly where it was, but it's certainly part of the Indus Valley area. And in fact, many scholars now are calling that early civilization the Indus/Saraswati civilization, because the civilization grew up along those two rivers. In fact, they think more of the settlements were along the Saraswati River rather than the Indus River. And so what do you get when you get civilization? Well, civilizations grow up around rivers. So this is the connection. It's very difficult to develop a high degree of civilization if you don't have a river there. And so the culture was able to grow up because with a river and with fertile soil, you can grow crops and you can begin to get a surplus of goods, and that gives some people some free time. So it freed up a few people to be artists, to be musicians, to be learned, to contemplate the nature of reality and to become great seers of wisdom. Without that, if you're always struggling to survive, those things don't happen. So it's because there was a river that all of these things grew up. And so it's natural that the idea of Saraswati would be transferred from the river goddess to the goddess of learning and arts. There are versions of Saraswati all over Southeast Asia, so she's a very popular figure. And that's interesting because there's not that much literature. There's no like whole Purana. I mean, most of the deities have a whole Purana on them. She's mentioned many times in the Rig Veda, but there's no Purana just dedicated to Saraswati like there would be to Shiva or Ganesha or some of the other deities. Sri Ramakrishna and several of the direct disciples said that Sri Sarada Devi was an incarnation of Saraswati, born to give knowledge to the human race in this modern age. So we see that Saraswati is the energy of learning, arts, song, culture, and so forth. And that includes spiritual knowledge. And she's nurturing, just like her original river nature. She's a nurturing mother goddess. Now, also, along with civilization, of course, we get language. And this is another aspect of the goddess Saraswati. She's often called Vak Devi, meaning the goddess of speech. And so, since speech and writing comes out with civilization, it's natural again to associate that energy with the goddess Saraswati. Now, eventually, she became associated with Brahma because Brahma is the creator aspect of the Godhead. And so, since she's the one thought of in charge of all of these nice creative activities like music and art and language and writing and poetry and so forth, it's natural to associate her as the consort of Brahma. In fact, Brahma is associated with the Vedas. He is said to have brought the knowledge of the Vedas to the rishis. And so it's, again, natural to think of Saraswati as the goddess of speech. It's difficult to think of how philosophy would happen if you didn't have language. Can you imagine thinking without language? Occasionally we get an impulse that's without speech, but pretty much we think in speech. And of course, animals have to react without speech. But of course, the dolphins and the porpoises and so forth, they have a kind of a language too. So we're not the only species with a language. It's interesting that they're almost all marine mammals that seem to have this ability to communicate with speech. And you know, there's kind of an unpopular theory that says perhaps we spent time in the water as an aquatic ape. So maybe we got a band of chimpanzee-like creatures got marooned on some islands and had to make their way by foraging for sea creatures and so forth. And so then if you're in the water, the body language tends to fail because most of your body is underwater. So you start to develop speech. And you have to develop breath control, which is important for speech. So all these things kind of indicate that perhaps we were descended from some sort of primate that had to spend some time in the water. Now, Swami Vivekananda says that the Vedas, and in particular the hymn of creation, is very musical. He says the sound of Sanskrit is musical. And in another passage he says, in the old Upanishads we find sublime poetry. Their authors were poets. And then he quotes Plato, and he says, Plato says inspiration comes to people through poetry, and it seems as if these ancient rishis, seers of truth, were raised above humanity to show these truths through poetry. They never preached, nor philosophized, nor wrote. This music of the Vedas came out of their hearts. All right, so now let's talk about the Satva Guna. That's the revealing guna. Remember then, Shankara's idea of the gunas is that tamas is the veiling power, rajas is the projecting power, and sattva is the revealing power, a little bit different from the way the Sankhya's interpreted the three gunas. So the Sattva Guna is the revealing guna, which means it's the thinnest veil of Maya. Maya is the veil which hides the nature, the true nature of Brahman from us. But the Sattva Guna is the most revealing. It's like a costume disguise that you can kind of tell who it is in that costume. They're trying to disguise themselves, but you can still tell who it is in the costume. So the classic example of Shankara, of course, is the rope and the snake. And in there, it's the size and shape of the rope that's revealing through the snake. You didn't think it was a truck or a loaf of bread or something because there's not enough similarity. But the nature of the rope shows through and as its length and shape, and so you think it's a snake. So that's the nature of the revealing power. And of course, our scriptures, the Vedas, are revealing of the truths. They reveal the truths of Brahman as clearly as can be through language. Of course, all language falls short of being able to describe it completely, And that's why we have to do spiritual practices and realize Brahman for ourselves to know what it is really like. Just as you have to taste a particular kind of fruit in order to know what it really tastes like. Someone can tell you it tastes a little bit like a combination of pineapple and strawberry or something, but until you've actually tasted a particular fruit, you don't really know what it tastes like. But the scriptures are most revealing to it. And also, music and art and drama and poetry are very revealing as well. In fact, music and sound are often used as symbols for creation itself. And so again, we have this idea of creation coming through music associated with the goddess Saraswati, the consort of Brahma. So it all kind of ties together. And we also know that music is a great aid to memory. We can remember things that are set to music much more easily than we can if it's just a bunch of random facts. In fact, I used to do that when I was a kid. I had to memorize a bunch of lists of things in school, and I would put them to tunes and able to memorize them that way. And of course, the scriptures are all chanted to tunes, and the reason they do that is that they were transmitted orally for generations after generations after generations. How are you going to do that so that it's manageable? Well, you do it to a chant tune, and it's much easier to remember. So the music and the learning all go together. And sound itself, of course, is often used as a metaphor for creation, and many of the myths of creation start with the idea of a sound or a word or a cry or something of that nature. So here's a quote. The Lord says to Narada, the great teacher of bhakti, "I do not live in heaven, nor do I live in the heart of the yogi, but where my devotees sing my praise, there I am." So this is the kind of power that music has over the human mind. It brings it to a point of concentration. We can be much more concentrated if we're listening to music. We can become completely absorbed in the music. Swami Vivekananda says that music is the highest art, and to those who understand, is the highest worship. And then again, in another passage, he says, drama and music are of themselves religion. Any song, love song or any song, never mind. If one's whole soul is in that song, he attains salvation just by that. Nothing else he has to do. If a man's whole soul is in that, his soul gets salvation. They say it leads to the same goal. All right, so that gives you the background of Goddess Saraswati. Let's look at Vivekananda and Brahmananda, and I will try to bring out some areas where they manifest this energy of Saraswati. Well, of course, Swami Vivekananda, according to Sri Ramakrishna's vision, was one of the 7 rishis. And of course, the rishis were the ones that gave us the Vedas, which are the basis of spiritual knowledge. He also had an encyclopedic memory. In fact, he memorized the encyclopedia. He read through it, and you could ask him something, and he says, well, it's on page so-and-so, and it says this. So his memory was incredible. This is obviously a gift of the goddess Saraswati. Swami Ashokananda says that powerful and unique though every one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples was, they held together and they bowed their heads before Swami Vivekananda, not because Sri Ramakrishna had asked it, but because they loved him and recognized in him a superior power and knowledge and superior ability. Now, at the parliament, you're probably familiar that he invoked the goddess Saraswati as the giver of Vak and asked her to come upon his lips before he had to give that first speech. Even though he was known as someone who could argue and debate with all his friends and win every argument that he had, speaking in front of several thousand foreigners was a completely different and new experience for him. He had not spoken in public before. And so he called upon a special blessing from the goddess Saraswati. And of course, his speeches were received with great eclat. He was said to have a very musical voice. His father, fortunately, arranged for his musical training, and people said that it was just delightful to listen to him. Even if he was just speaking, his voice seemed to be musical. And he would often open a subject for discussion we would often open a subject for discussion just so we could hear him talk. He was so interesting, his fellow disciples said, that above all, he was so original, and we learned so much just listening to him. Did anybody oppose him? Well, if they did, he would fall upon them with all his power of thought and language and would vanquish the opponents in no time. So this is the way his contemporaries saw him. Now, at the Kasipur garden house, where Sri Ramakrishna was being nursed, it became a temple and a university all in one. At the time, philosophy held the floor. At other times, devotional practices held the floor, and the disciples would be engaged in singing and chanting. And then Naran would say to the master, "Sir, give me a medicine that will cure all the illness of my mind and heart." And the master would respond in one of two ways. Either he would tell them to go and meditate, or he would tell them to go and sing. While singing, waves of rapturous love for God would sweep over the young Vivekananda, known as Naran, carrying him into realms of ecstasy. And the one reminiscence said that Naran's voice was so lively and sweet that whenever he rendered a tune in a song, the spirit of it became incarnate, as it were, in cadence and beauty. In fact, with Naran, music became a wonderful instrument for the adoration of the divine. It was through music that the first communion with Sri Ramakrishna took place. On listening to his singing, the latter would become deeply moved and go into samadhi. So again, we see this aspect of Saraswati being prominent in Swami Vivekananda's early life, as well as his later life. Now, not only was he musical, but he also had a fine hand for drawing. So his artistic abilities stretched into several different areas. And as he could pick up a song just by listening to it. He'd go to a theater performance and they'd be singing a song, and he could repeat it after he got back. Again, this memory of his was just phenomenal. Now, this, of course, continued throughout his life, and we can read from some of the newspaper articles that reported on his lecturing in the West that we find the same thing, that they feel his voice was very musical. This newspaper article says, "His culture, his eloquence, and his fascinating personality have given us a new idea of Hindu civilization. He is an interesting figure. His fine, intelligent, mobile face in its setting of yellows and his deep musical voice prepossessing one at once in his favor. So it is not strange that he has been taken up by the literary clubs, has preached and lectured in churches until the life of Buddha and the doctrines of his faith have grown familiar to us. He speaks without notes, presenting his facts and his conclusions with the greatest art, the most convincing sincerity, and rising at times to a rich, inspiring eloquence." So all of these abilities, this ability to be a powerful speaker and his ability to be musical and to be so full of knowledge about virtually any topic you could think of, are all qualities of the goddess Saraswati. There was a convention in Chicago, I think it was in 1993, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Parliament of Religions. And one Swami got up and proposed that we should promote the study of Sanskrit among all of our devotees so that they could study the Vedas in the original. And another Swami, Swami Nityaswarupananda, who had founded the Institute of Culture and was quite a noble soul, he got up and said, "Why Sanskrit? We have a new Veda in English. Vivekananda gave us a new Veda in English." So he was a very powerful man. So we can think of Swami Vivekananda's complete works as a new Veda in English. He attracted, like attracts like. So he attracted many famous singers and actors in the West. For example, Madame Calvé, she was one of the foremost opera singers of that day, and her musical performances were so appreciated that she had a huge income, and people had to get tickets way in advance and pay double the normal price. Sounds like some people we might think of today, where you have to buy tickets well in advance. But this was opera, so things have changed. So she was quite a cultured lady. Madame Bernhardt was a famous actress, and it was said that as soon as she stepped on stage, she completely became whatever age and sex of the role that was demanded of her, and she played it to an exact representation. There were many other famous people that he met, Madame Melba, Madame Emma Ames, and so forth. Many distinguished writers, authors, like Jules Boyce. So many of these famous people were attracted to him. Victor Hugo. So all of these famous writers, musicians, and actors were attracted to Swami Vivekananda. So as we can see, Swami Vivekananda was quite the world teacher. His expression was very outward, especially for a monk. He did many novel things that a traditional Hindu monk would not have been thought of as doing. And because of his great power, he could do it. If somebody else had done it, they would have just been criticized and mortified and put out of existence. But Swami Vivekananda's was so obviously a great soul that he was able to travel to the West. That was thought you were breaking your caste and you became a Malecha if you traveled outside of India. So that was problem number one. And then he mixed with all sorts of people in the West. Monks don't generally mix with women like that. And so he was able to do all of that and weather all the criticism from people. Now, Swami Brahmananda was a very different sort. In fact, some people described him as being rather shy. His expression was much more inward. He didn't deliver public lectures. He wasn't a public speaker. And although he loved music and appreciated music, he wasn't particularly musical as far as being a musician. He couldn't sing well or play an instrument well, but he did love music. But he was very efficient at carrying out Swami Vivekananda's vision for the monastery, for the new Ramakrishna order and the Ramakrishna Math. And so Swami Brahmananda was left in charge while Swami Vivekananda went on traveling. So Swami Brahmananda is usually thought of as the first president of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna had told his fellow disciples that Swami Brahmananda had the energy of a king, of a Raja, and that's why they called him Maharaj. He said he could rule a kingdom with his energy. Now that seems odd for somebody that's shy. You usually think of a king as being very powerful and outgoing and forceful, and yet Swami Brahmananda's power was all inward. Now these two were best friends. Swami Vivekananda and Swami Brahmananda were best friends when they were teenagers, even though they had these rather different temperaments. Now, what did Sri Ramakrishna say about Swami Brahmananda, who was Rockall in his earlier days. Other than him saying that he could rule a kingdom, he also had a vision that he was the playmate of Sri Krishna. And this also is a kind of an interesting comparison between these two traits. Here he is the playmate of Krishna and a ruler of a kingdom. And he actually did manifest both of those qualities in his life, even though they seem kind of contradictory. And we'll get into that as we go on. And as the first president of the order, he trained a whole generation of swamis that were to continue the work in India and abroad. Most of the swamis that I knew of as a child, the swamis that were heading centers here in the United States, almost all of them were disciples of Swami Brahmananda, or they had at least received, say, brahmacharya or sannyas from Swami Brahmananda. They might have been disciples of Holy Mother like Nikhilananda and Aseshananda, but they had received their brahmachari sannyas from Swami Brahmananda. So all of them were basically trained by Swami Brahmananda. So his influence on the early centers in the West was profound. And of course, our Southern California centers are in that generation as well. Swami Prabhavananda, who founded these centers, was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda. And he said that the work didn't grow until he remembered to always think of this as Swami Brahmananda's centers and Swami Brahmananda's work. Now, he had an interesting way about him that some people found a little odd. People would go to him and kind of expected some sort of spiritual discourse, you know, like many people you see on TV these days that are yogis and are giving all sorts of instructions. And they give all these different talks on spiritual matters. Very often, Swami Brahmananda would talk about very ordinary things. We talk about how mangoes grow very well in a particular part of the country and how he traveled to a particular way and he met particular people and so forth and so on. And he was able to talk on all sorts of subjects. So just like Swami Vivekananda, he seemed to have an incredibly broad knowledge about all sorts of topics and could give opinions on all sorts of things. But the strange thing was that just being in his presence, people felt uplifted. And if they came to him with problems, even if he didn't address the problems, they felt the problems were solved. And so this peculiar way he had of working from the inner planes, it was like he didn't want you to know that he was solving your problems. He didn't want to be thought of as some sort of cure-all or something, but he would do it silently, and rather than giving a spiritual discourse, would simply have a pleasant conversation, and you would find your problems solved. Swami Ashokananda, who was one of the heads of the San Francisco Center, I think he was the first one after the direct disciples that had headed that center, said that rarely did those who were earnest, even the least of them, talk with Swami Brahmananda without receiving something extraordinary in the form of either instruction or experience. Also, we have heard that through his supernatural insight, he was able to tell many people of their past and future. Oftentimes, he gave counsel that changed the course of a life. It was clear from the demeanor of those who had gone to him that their problems had been solved, and it was clear also that no one, whatever his religious temperament, came to him whom he was not able to guide properly. So sometimes he would directly give spiritual advice. That would be more likely in a very private session rather than in a group session. Sometimes, Shokananda goes on, he was asked to visit a center for a specific purpose of clearing up a misunderstanding or to settle a dispute. Such problems were brought to his attention, of course, only when the Swami in charge of the center or Swami Saradananda had not been able to solve them. Swami Brahmananda's method of bringing peace was unique and effective. He would say nothing at all about the difficulty, but a few days of his presence would work wonders. The monks would incline more and more towards spiritual practice, and consequently their minds would be straightened out. Tensions would just melt away, and any misunderstandings would lose its vitality. Then a few words of counsel from Maharaj would settle the matter. There's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam that reads, "When the Lord, who is an abode of all good, is manifested in the heart of anyone, then around him there is perpetual festivity, everlasting beauty and prosperity and eternal good." And it's said that this was literally true of Swami Brahmananda. When he was at a center, it became a place of great festivity, a great spiritual place, filled with wonderful vibrations of holy thoughts. And the joy of those holy thoughts was palatable. Now, he laid great emphasis on japa, and this is another quality of the goddess Saraswati. She's often pictured with a japa mala in one hand, indicating spiritual practices. He trained all of these early swamis to carry on the work. And jumping ahead a bit to when he was passing away, Swami Shivananda, who was then vice president, was, of course, was quite alarmed when he heard that Swami Brahmananda was failing, because, of course, if Swami Brahmananda passed away, the burden would be on him. And so he came rushing, and Swami Brahmananda intuited that he was worried and said, "Brother, you don't have to worry. The boys are all trained." So you see, he had trained all these people to administer the order. And of course, Swami Shivananda did become the next president of the order. All the various activities that Swami Vivekananda had envisioned for the order had taken root and grown. And there were some 15 monasteries throughout India that had been added to those that had been in existence before. He also had a very compassionate side. That motherly aspect of Saraswati also came through. For example, one day he was already in bed sleeping, and he suddenly woke up and intuited that there was a problem out in the Ganges, that the boat had capsized. So he went running down and woke up some of the other monks and said that the boat had overturned in the Ganges and the men were clinging to it and would be drowned. And so the monks rushed out to the river and overtook the boat and ran out and rescued the people. And Swami Brahmananda was much relieved. He started a center in Bhubaneswar that was originally going to be a retreat center, but again, his compassion opened up, his motherly aspect opened up, and they also started a dispensary and did relief work there as well. Now, as we mentioned, he wasn't what you'd call a musician himself, but he both loved and appreciated music and encouraged singing and used singing to solve problems. It was always his practice to have musicians around him that would be providing music for him to listen to. And he would listen in rapt ecstasy. And it wasn't just devotional music that he found inspiring. He could get inspired through any kind of good music. And so these expert musicians would play and sing for him. And of course, they much valued his appreciation. He introduced the singing of Ramnam into our order. So the fact that Ramnam is sung in the centers all over India and many of them here in the West, in Hollywood and Santa Barbara, we sing Ramnam. That's due to Swami Brahmananda's love of music and his appreciation of the Ram Kirtan that he had heard in South India. So he introduced that in our centers. He appreciated beauty in all its aspects. It wasn't just music, but he also appreciated all sorts of beauty, especially in the gardens. He loved gardens. And whenever a monastery was started, he would often instruct them as to what trees to plant and what shrubs to plant and which flowers to cultivate and so forth. And of course, they always would want to cultivate flowers for the worship. However, one interesting time, he saw someone picking all the flowers off of the plants for the worship. And he says, don't pick all the flowers. Ramakrishna is not only in the shrine. So he wanted there to be a puja in the garden as well. The garden should still look nice for Sri Ramakrishna. So he seemed to live on that sattvic plane, that which again is that Saraswati aspect of the Satva Guna, where the veil of Maya is very thin and revealing more of the subtle planes of existence. Of course, that's how he could intuit people's problems and whether they needed direct spiritual advice or whether just his presence was going to be able enough to transform them. And it's interesting that Swami Ashokananda, in his reminiscences, said that when he would look at Swami Brahmananda, his outline was fuzzy. He said nothing else was fuzzy. There was nothing wrong with my eyesight. The tables and the walls and everything, they weren't fuzzy. Swami Brahmananda's outline was fuzzy, as though he was merging into the infinite all the time and was managing to hold himself on this plane for our sake. And so, again, this is that thin veil of sattva that he lived in. There was an interesting incident where some young boys had heard about the Swami Brahmananda, and they thought he was living much too luxuriously for a monk. And so they were going to go kind of chide him and teach him a lesson. They were staying at a hotel, and the hotel manager said that I wouldn't do that if I were you. But they said, oh no, we're brave, we're going to go do that. So they go to visit him. Of course, Swami Brahmananda could intuit that they were coming. He just knew things. He was on that, he knew what was happening on the subtle planes. So he was ready for them, and he told his attendants that there was going to be some visitors and to show them in and then to please leave them alone. So they brought him in and shut the door, and they don't know what happened, but they kept hearing peals of laughter coming from the room. And those three boys left with a very different impression of Swami Brahmananda. And he did love to joke. He was very playful. Now, this is that playmate of Sri Krishna coming out. He was always the playmate of Sri Krishna, and that playfulness came out many, many times, especially with children. He was very fond of playing with children. And one time when the grandchildren of Balaram Bose were visiting, he dressed himself up in a bearskin and covered himself from head to foot in disguise and scared the little kids. And then, of course, they discovered who it was and had a good laugh. Another time he was seen playfully playing with a young boy and dancing playfully around them. He was pretending to be a cobra, and he was like poking like this, like a cobra. So he was, again, playing with the young kids. So he loved to play, and that he kept that childlike nature well into his old age. It didn't matter that he had gray hair and that he was the president of the order. He could still be fun-loving and playful. So he exhibited these Saraswati qualities of his great learning, being so completely sattvic and promoting music as a spiritual practice. So it seemed appropriate to close with a couple of songs. I'll read the words just to make sure that you can catch them. The first one is, I'm missing a page here. Maybe I'm not going to read the words here. Let's see if I can find the words. Here we go. All right. So the first one is a praise of Swami Brahmananda. It says, salutations to Swami Brahmananda, Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual son. Companion of Lord Krishna, he came down once again to lead the order and to help us all. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda, who taught us to have great faith in ourselves and told us to say, I heard his name and I have taken shelter at his feet. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda, who taught us to look for good in everyone we meet. Yes, even if there is no more than just a trace of good, so honor him and praise him for his good. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda. He recommends japam as the easiest way. It makes the mind calm and steady. So pray, 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 and hold fast to him. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda. He tells us that true happiness comes when we sacrifice the worldly pleasures that are fleeting by. Direct your energies toward God. And then the second song is based on his teachings. Move toward God, for the more you do so, greater will your bliss be. Spurn all worldly enjoyments, strictly be resolved to realize God. Human birth is to realize God in this very life. One must believe in God's existence, hold fast to him with devotion. He who is personal and with form is without form as well. He dwells in every being. He pervades land and water. He is infinite, yet he incarnates in human form too. God is most manifest in humans, but he dwells in all things. Your capacity is infinite. Have great faith in yourself. Now, these are sung by what you could call a virtual choir. Ever since the beginning of the pandemic, we haven't had a live choir. So I have people send me their voice singing their parts, and then I have to edit it all together. So you're all welcome to join the virtual choir too. If you can sing, I send you an audio file and a PDF of the score, and so you listen to the accompaniment on earphones and sing your part into a recording, send it off. And so this is how this is done. The first one, I had to do it in a rush. So one singer sang the alto and soprano, and I sang the tenor and the bass. You've only got two people singing, but it sounds a little bit like more than two people. But the second one is kind of the full complement of I have about 10 singers that I get things from.
Salutations to Swami Brahmananda, Sri Ramakrishna spiritual son, companion of Lord Krishna, we come once again to give the order and to help us all. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda, who taught us to have great faith in ourselves, and told us to say, I have heard his name, and I have taken shelter at his feet. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda, Swami Brahmananda, he tells us that true happiness comes when we sacrifice worldly pleasures that was fleeting by. Direct your energy to God. Direct your energy to
Is it still too loud, do you think? Just start a little bit.
Lord, 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 you do so. Greater will your bliss be. Spurn all worldly enjoyments strictly. Be resolved to realize God. Human birth is to realize God. Realize God in this very life. One must believe in God's existence, hold fast to Him with devotion. He who is personal and grateful is without form as well. He dwells in every being. He pervades land and water. He is infinite, yet incarnates in human form too. God is most manifest in humans, but He dwells in all things. Your capacity is infinite. Have great faith in yourself.
All right, so the nice thing about singing in a choir and singing the music is that the words tend to go around in your head. If you've had to learn the song, then the nice inspiring words continue to stay with you. So that's, again, the power of music to help us remember things. All right, so I shall close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman bloweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.